Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 5 of History 311 Online Summer Edition. Coming to you today from the home office once again in sunny California. One of the essential purposes of a course like this is to develop your own historical reading, writing, and reasoning skills. In effect, to teach you how to think historically. Along those lines, I've provided you with various guides and rubrics for the homework and discussion posts, including one video guide called How to Write a Strong Discussion Board Post. But really, our work is never done in this regard because you never stop learning. We should be having this discussion about how to think historically throughout the entire 8 weeks of the course. As you've now completed the first half of the course, including 2 homework and discussion post assignments, I'd like to offer some additional comments for your consideration going forward this summer, relevant to your remaining assignments, including the remaining homework assignments, a final discussion post assignment, a document analysis assignment, and your final essay. Perhaps the greatest weakness of student writing about history, and that includes our discussion post assignments, is the tendency to take a little knowledge about the subject. Maybe you've heard something before in an earlier history class, or perhaps something you picked up from a quick look at the material now, and then hope that it is sufficient to adequately discuss what are complex historical questions. That almost never works. And so with that in mind, when you attempt to answer a prompt like, how was the West won? Our discussion post 2 prompt. Or was the government justified in prosecuting Eugene Debs from our discussion post 3 assignment? Or the discussion post 4 assignment on Joseph McCarthy yet to come, or your final essay prompt, or your document analysis prompt. You should recognize that there are no easy answers in history. In fact, one of the surest signs that a student is not adequately prepared for such an assignment is the appearance of an oversimplified, poorly supported, easy answer to the prompt. Remember, I'm not evaluating your work based on your opinions or conventional thinking, but rather how well you have demonstrated familiarity with the assigned sources and your overall understanding of the historical issues involved, down to the level of historical detail, especially basic contextual details that answer the basic context questions of who, what, where, and when. Thinking historically in the most basic sense means thinking about the subject in terms of the past, not the present, but the past, in its own time. There's an old saying that the past is a foreign country and they do things differently there. And I like that because it reminds us that we have to understand the actions of past peoples on their own terms, with a clear understanding of the mindset, attitudes, thoughts, habits, conventions, and material conditions of the particular time we're studying. We want to avoid the sin of presentism, which means assuming that everything then was the same as everything now. We also want to avoid the related sin of anachronism, which means attributing something to a past time that did not actually exist at that time. 2 words worth thinking about: presentism and anachronism. I'll email you this transcript so you might see how they're spelled and look them up in the dictionary. One way to avoid both presentism and anachronism is to draw deeply from our weekly lectures, which I designed to help you frame and define the past context we study with specific historical details, themes, and analysis. To help you see this, I'll post a sample discussion post 2 under the week 5 module. The point with your writing this summer is not simply to offer a personal opinion, but rather a well-informed, historically well-supported, and contextualized assessment of the evidence and historically well-informed analysis. Now, don't get me wrong, I love it when students are passionate about their perspectives. That's only when their perspectives reflect a solid understanding of the materials assigned. And I want to emphasize here the word assigned, as in the materials I've assigned for you to study. Sometimes students will be tempted to rip content off the internet, content from other online sources that I have not assigned. While I realize that you're only a Google search away from information on virtually any topic we cover, I strongly discourage you from what I call freelancing the information. You know, finding your own sources and content to cut and paste into a discussion post, homework assignment, or essay. If your post omits a serious discussion of the material I have assigned you, what am I left to grade? What can I score, if not your understanding of those assigned sources? Besides, running to the internet for answers totally defeats the purpose of learning yourself how to think historically. With the materials I've assigned you, you have all that you need to practice thinking historically, and just as importantly, have a level playing field with each other to discuss and think about the history we're studying. Besides, as your instructor, I don't have the time or the inclination to be chasing down internet sources to judge their reliability. And that raises another point, I think. I shouldn't have to do that kind of fact-checking, since one of the primary benefits of you learning how to think historically is that you become a better, sharper, more discerning thinker about the past, and therefore less likely to accept on face value the myths and distortions that often pass as history, whether in the media, politics, or even sometimes in history classes. In other words, what you are learning this summer is to be your own historian. The problem with too many of the Discussion 2 posts on the American West, for example, is that too often many of you settle for popular misunderstandings of the West and its history, instead of correcting those misunderstandings with the history I assigned you to learn. Too often there was simply too little of our lectures, including the Lakota lecture, but also the Industrial Revolution lecture, and sometimes too little of your assigned reading from the textbook. What you should understand, or at least begin to understand now, is that history is not simply a subject used to celebrate our heritage. In fact, history and heritage are really separate entities. I've even scolded some of you on the earlier discussion posts for using pronouns like we and our in referring to the events of the 19th century, as if you were there and took part in the history we're studying. What you're assuming, of course, is that American nationalism, patriotism, entitles one to say we or our simply by membership in the nation. Now, that may work for nationalism or patriotism, but does it make sense for historical truth and accuracy? Sports fans do this. They say, we won the Super Bowl, or we won the World Series, when in fact, what they mean to say, if they're being strictly accurate, is that they root for the team whose players won the World Series or Super Bowl, or World Cup. If we want to understand what happened in the World Series, we'd study the players, the game, the conditions surrounding it, etc. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Study the history on its own terms. Yes, now we do tell our children in school sanitized versions of history in order to promote good citizenship. But the fact is, and I mean fact, history is a mess, strewn with unpleasant realities. You should not conclude that whatever might have happened, that it was all somehow necessary for, quote, America to be the country it is today, unquote. There are a few cliches more banal than the we would not be where we are today cliche in history. Is a kind of empty cop-out that substitutes a lazy fatalism, inevitability, and misplaced self-congratulation for careful analysis and historical understanding. So, what I'm telling you is that you must recognize that much of what you've been taught to regard as American history is actually something else, something more like mythology and nostalgia, propaganda and patriotism. And therefore, you really can do history that is right about America's past on its own terms, but only by keeping out the presentism and anachronism. And in a thoughtful and accurate way, a way consistent with the evidence and facts of the past, you can see history itself differently. History is not mythology, and history is not heritage. And it pays to keep in mind that there are few easy answers in history. And most of what you think you know about the past, even America's past, is likely to be dreadfully inadequate to our task this summer. Remember, the adage, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. All right, well, once you come to terms with that, you'll be in a much better position to successfully do history, to think historically. So, yeah, dig into the sources I assign, read them carefully, reflect thoughtfully on what you've read, and see yourself not just answering a question or checking off an assignment, but engaging in a thoughtful, accurate discussion and debate about the past based on the evidence found in the sources I assigned you. As always, I thank you for your patience in awaiting for submissions to be scored. You may see fewer comments on future assessments of your work, since most of the core principles about historical thinking I've already expressed with my feedback up to this point. I'll rely more on the scoring rubrics to communicate my assessments to you. But you should still get in touch with me if you have any questions about the process I've outlined and our work moving forward, including your scores. As always, have a great week, everyone.